Okay, so we've talked about interactive rendering. Let's talk about disk rendering. Now, if you make a standard render node in Katana, you're going to see that there's an output that it specifies. I'm going to go ahead and disable this node by hitting D for a second and show you what the default looks like. So you can see the output directory is actually specified as my user app data local Katana temp directory. And then it's going to output this giant big file name here, .number.exr. In order to specify something like this normally, you would use a render output define node. So hit tab, render output define. And if you make one of these, you're going to get this interface. So here you're going to see you've got which channels you're outputting, what file extension, color space, all that kind of stuff. And location type, if you set this to file, then you get an interface in order to set a file location, right? So you could say I want to render sequences, the shot, go to footage, and say I want to output here. Hit accept. So, and you can see it didn't actually put any extension on here. If I go and view this, it's not even going to call it .exr, right? So I've got to make sure that, .number.exr. And usually actually you want four numbers in there. And this would be the way you would manually set this up. So if you need to specify AOVs to go into this that are in addition to RGBA, you have to create an Arnold output channel define node, right? And you need to put that right here before it, right? So if I create one of these, you'll see this is normally how you create output channels. And so you could say I want to output diffuse, and the channel here you would call diffuse. You actually just type in a name. Now diffuse is recognized by Arnold as one of the default AOVs that you could output. So this would be all you need to do. And you would say, you know what, I need this to be half precision or full float, whatever you want. Set compression and all that kind of stuff here. And once you've defined this here, now if we go back to our output define, you'll see from this list, now we have another one that we can check, right? So we could output 2 channels into this file. Now you could go ahead and make separate EXR files for each one of these outputs, but I don't like to do that. Personally, I like to group all of my AOVs under one giant EXR file. Now, it may or may not be the most efficient thing, and I've seen pipelines where we split up EXRs into a couple of different files with groups of AOVs together. So for instance, maybe you've got one file for RGBA, another file for component AOVs, maybe another file for your utility AOVs like position, normal, albedo, etc. And maybe that file needs to be 32 bits, and maybe your other files need to be 16 bits, etc., etc. But what I'm going to show you now is a different way that you can set that up using custom nodes. I built this custom node here, and I'm going to show you how that works. When you want to build a custom node in Katana, it's actually very straightforward. Let's delete those, enable our custom node here. This is actually just a group node. You can see up here the type is group. So if you hit tab, you can just type group and create one of these. And I've customized it to add some custom user interface to this. And if I dive in, I'll dive in a second. But first of all, I want to show you how do you customize a group node. So if you go up to this little wrench here, click on here, edit user parameters. Okay. And so any user parameter you want to add, you can just add. So if you want a string, if you want a number, let's go ahead and add a number down here. So there's our new parameter. You can rename it to my awesome parameter. Okay. You can change what type of widget this is. So if you click on this little wrench here, you can go to widget type, and maybe you want a checkbox instead of a number. Right, so now you could check it on and off. Checking it on means this number value is set to 1. Checking it off means this is set to 0. Once you have some of these, you can access these underneath the hood. So you can, let's go ahead and delete that one. Once you've set all this up, go up to the wrench, and then you would finish editing user parameters. Another thing too, if you go back here, you can show user parameters at the top level. So I have that checked on. And then you can also toggle group node appearance off. So by default, it's going to look like this with this little plus sign. So by toggling that off, it gets rid of the plus sign. So this is still a group, just doesn't show the plus sign, right? And if I turn off user parameters at the top level, finish editing, you'll see now I get this user tab here, which I don't necessarily want, right? So that's what that does. Let's go ahead and turn that off again. Oops, finish editing. Now you can see I don't have that user tab. I'm going to get into this pass name expression in a second, but we'll just say, you know, I've got some versions, and these are going to be checkboxes to enable the different AOV groups that I want to output. I'm used to grouping AOVs together, like I mentioned before. So all my light path expressions, you know, with a checkbox, components, utilities, and cryptomats, and I'll get into that in a sec. Now, under the hood, we have an Arnold output channel define node. Now, this is where you're going to specify your output channels. And then there's some options here that you're going to use. So compression, the default is zip. I'm just leaving it at that. Half precision is adequate for RGBA output. And then tiled, this is also a default. I'm just leaving that turned on. And everything else here, I'm just leaving as it normally comes. Now, after that, we need this node, which is called a render output define node. Now, you'll see here, I'm enabling RGBA and primary channels. And then down here under the render location, I've actually specified expression. So let me take you through what that expression is doing. I think you can see from the result of the expression that I'm grabbing the project, which is the project up here, right? So if I go to my project graph state variable, I've specified the project level on disk. So I'm grabbing this path first. Then I'm going to add a sequences folder to it, which is this sequences folder here. Then I'm going to add the sequence graph state variable. So that happens to be this one. Then I'm going to grab the shot from here. And that's going to add the shot right here. And then after that, I'm going to add folders for footage. So I know that I've created a footage subdirectory underneath each one of these shots. Okay. And then I'm going to create a folder called pass name. Okay. And so the pass name is the name of the render output. And so actually that is, again, the name of this render node. So whatever you say for pass name, that's what's going to end up in that section here. Okay. Let's go back into here for a second. Back to this one. So once you've got that pass name, now I'm going to add a version number. And this version number is coming from, again, this version custom attribute that I've created. Actually, let me just right click here real quick and show parameters in a floating pane so that I can just leave these sitting on screen and then I can dive into this. Okay. I'm using power tools in Windows, so I could just leave that on top. I've got a hotkey to set that up. So now this is just going to stay floating on top of my window. And so now I'm back into this node here, right? So we've got our pass name, we've got our version number, which we've specified here. So it's going to make a version subdirectory. And so every time I'm rendering this out, if I decide I want to version up, I just move this to version 2. And now it's going to make a version 2 subfolder. And then primary, because this is the primary output. So I can leave that set as a specified directory. And then I'm going to add another. So now I'm going to set the file name. So I'm going to say the shot number. And then this is the pass name again, the full scene. And then the primary output. And then 4 digits of padding. And then .exr, right? So that's what that expression is doing. This is something that I like to do as far as this folder structure. It's very specific to this. If we go back to our lighting course, remember I've got my sequences here and I got my shots and then my footage. You can see that's the path in comparison, right? So this primary thing would be optional. It might be an extra level. So the reason I had that in here is because you could actually set this up to have your 4 AOVs go to different outputs if you wanted to. And I'll get to that in a second. So if you have unchecked all of these, what's going to happen is you're going to get just these 2 nodes. And that's because what I've done is set up some switches. So I have a switch node here. The switch is just expressing to this user attribute. So you can see this is set to 0. If I click this checkbox, now it's set to 1. And so this is the syntax that you need to write. You're saying this expression equals, go up 1 level to this level of the group. That's what the up arrow is. And then user parameters, and then this is the name of the parameter that you've created. And so that's how each one of these works, right? So if you're going to not have lights, you're going to just specify your primary output, RGBA. You're going to say that this is going out to disk to this location. And then you're going to go through each one of these switches, which are all set to 0. Okay. Now, as soon as you set one of these switches to 1, like for instance, if we set lights to 1, what's going to happen is now you're going to go through this path, right? And so I've added an additional Arnold output channel define called light. Now there's an expression here that just says, you know what? This channel is the same as the name, right? That's all that is. And I'm going to output this as a zip compressed, half precision float tiled channel into my EXR with these settings here. Light groups is set to separate AOVs. Now, this separate AOVs is nice because whatever light group names that you have set in your lights are going to get explicit channels underneath. And like I mentioned in interactive render filters chapter, this functionality is nice because it lets you have whatever arbitrary channel names. But if you go to this help, you'll see here that when you set this to separate AOVs, it will output channels into an EXR or TIFF with one light that matches the LPE. But it does not apply during preview or live renders, right? And so that's why I had to set this up for the interactive render filters as light 1, light 2, light 3, light 4. I had to explicitly name all of those channels for that to work. So for now, this is set to separate AOVs. It's going to go out to the exact same file path. So this is the same file path sequence, right? So regardless of whether this is checked on or off, it's going to output exactly the same file. Okay. Now this is where you could say, you know what, I want to output my lights to a different file, in which case you could modify this expression to have, you know, instead of primary, maybe you call this lights or something like that. And then you're going to get 2 pieces of footage on disk in 2 separate subdirectories, right? And so that's the beauty of this. You can set this up however you like, split them out. Maybe you want to have all of your 32-bit channels in one output, you know, for your normals and stuff like that. So next, let's move on. We've got another set of Arnold output channel defines, one for each of the component AOVs, right? And so these are all the standard outputs that you would normally do. And then after that, you're going to do your render output define as well. And again, this is exactly the same path. Optionally, you could change the path to be, you know, components or something like that. And then our switch is set to this components checkbox, right? So that turns it on. Same thing for our albedo, z-depth, normals, p-pass. You can see each one of these, though, I'm turning off half precision. So for normals, position, and z-depth, you want to have full precision, just because that makes it better for compositing. So the last one I'm going to talk about is cryptomats. Cryptomats need a couple of extra steps. So again, we're going to have a switch node down here for enabling cryptomats, right? But in order to set up cryptomats, we actually have to create a cryptomat material. So this is a standard material node. So I've added a shader, which is an Arnold AOV shader, and then I've, from this list, selected cryptomat, okay? And you can see by default, I haven't touched any of these settings. This is what happens normally. Okay, so then after that, you're going to create an Arnold global settings. And in this global settings node, you want to, under the channel definitions, you want to put that material that you've created. And so again, if I'm selected to here, let's go over to our Scene Explorer window, and if we go into materials, you'll see that this cryptomat material has shown up because of our cryptomat material that we created. And so you would just expand this out to your AOV channels, so your AOV shaders, and then you would middle click drag your cryptomat material onto this. Under miscellaneous settings, this is just inheriting stuff from upstream, so I wouldn't worry about that. That's because of our template at a higher level. Next, you're going to do your Arnold output channel define again. It's just the same thing. These are standardized names, so these names have to match. Zip compression, and you have to use full precision. So I've got for objects, materials, and assets. Okay, and then finally, again, your render output define. You have that exact same output file name. Now for your channel here, I've just enabled all the channels here. So, oh yeah, that's another thing to note. Each one of these as they're going down, just enable all the channels. You need to account for the fact that these switches may be turned on upstream. So just go ahead and enable all the channels for each one of these. Okay, so once you've got that, you've got all of your channels set up. Let's jump back out. So that's your final switch. Go back out here. And so if I go back into here, you're going to see, let's close that because it's a duplicate. So our pass name, that's the one thing I didn't mention before. So pass name is just expressed to get the pass name from this render node. Okay, so whatever you have written as pass name here, this node is going to get that parameter from this node because that's the name of the node, and then that's the parameter on that node. Okay, now if I copy and paste this, and then I separately copy and paste this and hook it up, it may not actually work, right? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. See, I think it's actually disconnected here. See, it's still looking for full scene, not full scene 1. Okay, when you copy and paste these separately, that connection breaks. However, if you grab both of them at the same time and copy it and then paste it, you'll see this is actually connected properly. So that's it. Well, you've got to make sure when you're copying this pass, these two things just need to go together each time. So that's just one thing to remember with the way I've set this up. And again, like I said, if you had gone through and set up 4 different outputs underneath the hood, you'd actually see 4 little triangles underneath this scene output, right? And so I've got them all going into one. That's just the way I prefer it. All right, one last thing. Let's test that this actually works by rendering it to disk. So you can right click on your node here and do a disk render. Real quick, let's go over to our folder. We're expecting to write out to the shot 10 footage folder, right? So let's see how this goes. And we'll come back to this once this is done. Okay, our render is complete. That was not particularly fast, but that's all right. We're going to optimize stuff a little bit later. So let's take a look on disk. So here on disk, here's our footage folder for our shot. And we have a full scene directory. Underneath, we've got a version 2 folder, primary output, and there's our EXR file. Okay, we've got Nuke launched. Let's go ahead and drop this reader in here. Take a look at it. Renasis, that was the correct color space, and you can see we have our image here. Let's take a look at the channels. Depth, P, N, diffuse, lights 1 and 2. Let's see, albedo. Yep, everything looks like we would expect it. If we want to make sure the cryptomats are working, let's hit tab and make a cryptomat. So let's check it out. There's our cryptomat, assets, materials, and objects. There we go. So that looks like everything is working. So from here forward, we're going to discuss the process and strategies for lighting your shot.